"I can't breathe," the young woman whispered, her hand clutching her pregnant belly as she clung to her husband in panic. At 38,000 feet over the Atlantic, the man could only call out for help from the flight attendants. The crew called for a doctor, but no one responded. In that desperate moment, a teenager from economy class, wearing a worn-out hoodie, quietly stood up. With incredible confidence, he asked for a chance to help. Could this boy perform the extraordinary? Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Let me know in the comments. The cabin lights in first class had been dimmed to a soft amber glow, creating an intimate cocoon of luxury 38,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Clara Whitmore leaned back against the butter-soft leather seat, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly as she felt their baby kick. She was 7 months pregnant, and this flight from New York to Frankfurt was supposed to be their last big trip before the baby arrived. "Feel that," she whispered to her husband Daniel, guiding his hand to where their child was moving. "He's going to be a soccer player, I swear." Daniel Whitmore smiled, his expensive suit jacket draped over the seat beside him, his silk tie loosened after a long day of meetings in Manhattan. At 42 he was the picture of success, CEO of Whitmore Medical Technologies, a company that manufactured cutting-edge surgical equipment for hospitals across America. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his manicured hands gentle as they touched his wife's stomach. "Either way, this little one is already keeping us on our toes," he countered softly, leaning over to kiss Clara's forehead. The steady hum of the Boeing 777's engines created a soothing rhythm, and most of the first-class passengers had already reclined their seats into flat beds, surrendering to sleep. A flight attendant moved quietly through the cabin, offering warm towels and checking if anyone needed anything. Everything was peaceful, perfect, exactly as it should be in the exclusive forward cabin where tickets cost more than most people earned in a month. Clara shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. The pregnancy had been difficult: gestational diabetes, high blood pressure, constant fatigue. But they'd been so careful, following every doctor's order, taking no chances with their precious cargo. "Daniel," Clara said softly, her voice carrying a slight edge that made him look up from his tablet where he'd been reviewing tomorrow's presentation. "I feel strange." "Strange how?" he asked, immediately attentive, setting the tablet aside. "I don't know, my chest feels tight." She pressed her hand against her sternum, her breath coming a bit faster. "Like there's a weight on it." Daniel's brow furrowed with concern. "Is it the baby? Should I call the flight attendant?" "No, it's not," Clara started to say, then gasped. Her other hand flew to her chest, joining the first, and her face suddenly contorted in pain. "Daniel, I can't breathe." The words came out in a desperate wheeze. Daniel watched in horror as his wife's lips began to take on a bluish tinge, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. Sweat beaded on her forehead, despite the cool cabin temperature. "Clara," Daniel's voice cracked with panic. He jabbed frantically at the call button, then lunged into the aisle. "Help, we need help. My wife. Something's wrong." The flight attendant, Maria Rodriguez, hurried over, her professional calm immediately shifting to concern when she saw Clara's distress. The pregnant woman was now clutching her chest with both hands, her breathing rapid and shallow, her skin taking on a grayish pallor that even the dim lighting couldn't hide. "Ma'am, what are you feeling?" Maria asked, kneeling beside Clara's seat. "Can't breathe." Clara gasped, each word an effort. Her eyes were wide with terror, darting between her husband and the flight attendant, silently begging them to make it stop. Maria grabbed the intercom handset with shaking fingers. Her voice, when she spoke, tried to maintain professional composure, but fear bled through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency. If there is a doctor on board, please identify yourself immediately. We need medical assistance in the first-class cabin." The announcement echoed through the plane, and suddenly the peaceful cabin erupted into activity. Passengers sat up, looking around with concern. Another flight attendant, Robert Hayes, rushed forward with the medical kit. "Any doctors, anyone with medical training?" Maria called out, looking desperately around the first-class cabin. Silence. The other passengers, a tech entrepreneur, a pair of lawyers, a fashion designer, an elderly couple, all shook their heads helplessly. Robert pulled out the tablet they used for passenger information. Let me check the manifest, he said urgently, his fingers flying across the screen. Everyone has to list their occupation when they book. Daniel hovered over Clara, one hand on her shoulder, the other still holding hers. Baby, stay with me, just breathe, okay, just breathe. But even as he said it, he could see it wasn't working. Her breaths were coming in rapid shallow gasps, her chest rising and falling frantically, but clearly not getting enough air. Daniel, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The baby, what about the baby? The baby's fine, you're both going to be fine, Daniel said, his voice breaking. He'd never felt so helpless in his life. He could close billion-dollar deals, navigate corporate boardrooms, command rooms full of executives, but here, watching his wife struggle for air, he was utterly powerless. Robert was scrolling through the passenger list, his face growing more desperate with each swipe. Engineer, teacher, accountant, business consultant, journalist. His voice trailed off. There's no one, no doctors, no nurses, no paramedics, nothing. Check economy, Maria ordered. Check the whole plane. Robert's fingers flew across the tablet, expanding the search to all 312 passengers on board. The seconds ticked by like hours. Clara's gasps were becoming weaker, her grip on Daniel's hand loosening. Oh God, Daniel sobbed, pressing his forehead against Clara's. Please, somebody help us. Please. That's when they heard it. A voice from the back of the first-class cabin, young and uncertain but clear. I might be able to help. Every head turned. Standing in the aisle, having apparently walked up from economy class, was a teenage boy. He was 17 at most, African American, wearing a faded Oakland Raiders hoodie and worn jeans that had seen better days. His sneakers were scuffed, his backpack was patched with duct tape, and he looked completely out of place in the luxury of first class. Marcus Johnson had been trying to sleep in his cramped economy seat when he heard the announcement. He debated with himself for almost 30 seconds. Nobody would believe him, he'd just get in trouble, he should stay in his seat. But then he'd remembered his grandmother, Evelyn, clutching her chest in their tiny Oakland kitchen, and he couldn't not try. Daniel looked at the boy with disbelief turning rapidly to anger. Are you a doctor? No sir, but I. Then sit down. Daniel's voice was harsh, desperate. This isn't a joke. My wife is dying. Marcus flinched but held his ground. I know sir, I can see that. She's having trouble breathing, her lips are turning blue, that's cyanosis. She needs help right now. Maria stepped between them. Son, unless you have medical training, I took a first aid course at Oakland Community Center, Marcus interrupted, his words coming faster now, urgently. And my grandmother, she has a heart condition. I've been taking care of her for 3 years. I've seen this before, the chest pain, the difficulty breathing, the blue lips. It looks like a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in her lungs. Robert, still holding the tablet, looked at Marcus with surprise. That's actually possible. Pregnant women on long flights are at higher risk for blood clots. Do you have aspirin in the medical kit? Marcus asked, looking at Maria. We need to give her aspirin immediately and get her on oxygen, and you need to tell the pilots to land this plane as soon as possible. Daniel, still holding his wife's trembling hand, looked at the teenager with a mixture of desperation and doubt. You're just a kid. You can't, Mr. Whitmore. Maria cut in, her voice suddenly firm. She'd pulled out her phone and was reading something on the screen. I just looked up the symptoms he's describing. He's right. Everything matches pulmonary embolism protocol. Protocol. Daniel's voice cracked. He learned this from some community center class. You want to let some kid from Oakland experiment on my wife. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Marcus felt his face burn with shame and anger, but he pushed it down. This wasn't about him. This was about saving a life. I'm not experimenting, Marcus said quietly, meeting Daniel's eyes. I'm trying to help. But if you'd rather wait and hope a real doctor magically appears, that's your choice. Your wife doesn't have much time. Clara made a horrible gurgling sound, her body starting to go limp. Her eyes were rolling back, her breathing becoming even more labored. Daniel, she whispered, so faint they could barely hear her. That broke something in Daniel. He looked at his wife, at the terror in her fading eyes, then back at the teenage boy who stood there with such earnest determination despite being treated with suspicion and contempt. Please, Daniel choked out. Please help her. Marcus didn't hesitate. He moved forward immediately, kneeling beside Clara's seat with a confidence that seemed at odds with his youth. His hands, though they trembled slightly, moved with purpose. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice gentle but clear. "My name is Marcus. I'm going to help you, okay? You're having trouble breathing because there might be a blood clot blocking oxygen from getting to your lungs. We're going to fix this." Clara's terrified eyes locked onto his, finding something there. Hope, maybe, or just the desperate need to trust someone. "Maria, I need the aspirin from the medical kit, and the oxygen tank," Marcus instructed, his voice taking on an authority that seemed impossible for someone his age. "Robert, tell the cockpit we need an emergency landing at the nearest airport. This is critical." As they scrambled to comply, Marcus turned to Daniel. "Sir, I need you to help me. We're going to elevate her legs to help blood flow back to her heart. Can you lift her feet while I adjust the seat?" Daniel nodded numbly, following Marcus's instructions. The boy moved with surprising expertise, adjusting Clara's position, taking her pulse, watching her breathing pattern. "Her pulse is racing, tachycardia," Marcus noted, more to himself than anyone else. "Respiratory rate is way too high. We need that oxygen now." Maria returned with the supplies. Marcus quickly crushed 2 aspirin tablets and helped Clara swallow them with a small sip of water. "This will help prevent the clot from getting bigger," he explained. Then he fitted the oxygen mask over her face with gentle hands. "This is going to help you breathe easier, Mrs. Whitmore. Just try to take slow, deep breaths. I know it's hard, but try." The other first-class passengers had gathered around, watching in stunned silence. A woman in a designer suit whispered to her companion, "Is that kid from economy? What's he doing up here?" "Apparently saving someone's life," the companion whispered back, "which is more than we can do." Marcus blocked out everything except Clara. He monitored her pulse, adjusted the oxygen flow, spoke to her in a constant soothing stream of words. "You're doing great, Mrs. Whitmore. That's it, slower breaths. Your baby needs you to stay calm. Everything's going to be okay." Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Clara's breathing began to stabilize. The blue tinge to her lips started to fade, just slightly. Her grip on Daniel's hand, which had gone slack, tightened again. Robert rushed back from the cockpit. "The captain says we're 68 minutes from Frankfurt International. They're declaring an emergency, and there will be medical personnel waiting at the gate." 68 minutes, Marcus repeated, calculating. He looked at Clara's slightly improved but still critical condition. "We can make it. We just need to keep her stable." Daniel, who had been frozen in place, watching this teenager save his wife's life, suddenly realized something. "You said you learned this taking care of your grandmother in Oakland?" Marcus nodded, not taking his eyes off Clara. "Yes, sir. My grandmother, Evelyn Benson. She's had heart problems for years. I help her with her medications, take her to doctor appointments when we can afford them, monitor her symptoms. When she had her first serious episode 3 years ago, the paramedics taught me what to do. I took every first aid class I could find after that. I never wanted to feel helpless like that again." "You're 17? Maria asked softly. "Yes, ma'am. I turn 18 next month." "And you're traveling alone?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. I had a college interview in New York, at Columbia, for a pre-med program. But I missed it. Missed it." Daniel's head snapped up. "Why?" "The flight got delayed leaving Oakland yesterday. By the time we landed in New York, the interview was already over. I spent the night in the airport, and this was the first flight back." Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless, but there was a world of disappointment hidden behind those words. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. This kid had missed his chance at Columbia, was flying home with nothing to show for it, and instead of being bitter or angry, he was up here in first class saving strangers. The next hour was the longest of everyone's lives. Marcus never left Clara's side, constantly monitoring her condition, adjusting the oxygen, talking to her about anything and everything to keep her conscious and calm. He told her about his grandmother, about Oakland, about the community center where he'd learned first aid from a retired EMT, volunteered there. "My teacher, Mr. Jackson, he always said that knowledge isn't about credentials," Marcus said, checking Clara's pulse for the 100th time. "It's about caring enough to learn and brave enough to act." He taught me that every second counts in an emergency. That's why I couldn't just sit in my seat back there. Clara, breathing easier now but still weak, managed to squeeze his hand. Through the oxygen mask, she whispered, "Thank you." Daniel watched this exchange, watched this kid who had every reason to be angry at the world, show nothing but compassion and skill. He thought about how he'd almost refused this help, how his prejudice and fear had almost cost Clara her life. "I'm sorry," Daniel said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "What I said before, about you being just a kid from Oakland. I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him steadily. "It's okay, Mr. Whitmore, you were scared. Fear makes people say things they don't mean." "No," Daniel insisted. "It's not okay. I judged you the second I saw you, and you're saving my wife's life, despite that. You're a better man than I am." Before Marcus could respond, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing. We will be on the ground in Frankfurt in 10 minutes. Emergency medical personnel are standing by." Those last 10 minutes felt like an eternity. As the plane began its descent, Marcus continued to monitor Clara, noting every change, every improvement, every sign of stability. When they finally touched down and the plane taxied to the gate at emergency speed, Clara was breathing on her own, her color much improved, though still clearly in need of immediate medical attention. The moment the plane stopped, the door opened and German emergency medical personnel rushed in. Marcus quickly briefed them in clear, concise terms: symptoms, timeline, treatment provided. They nodded approvingly, clearly impressed with the assessment and care. As they loaded Clara onto a stretcher, she reached out and grabbed Marcus's hand one more time. "You saved us," she whispered, her other hand on her belly. "You saved both of us." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes but blinked them back. "I'm just glad I could help, Mrs. Whitmore." Daniel followed the stretcher but turned back to Marcus. "Come with us, please. I need you to explain everything to the doctors, and I need to know you're okay. I need to thank you properly." Marcus hesitated, thinking of the long trip back to Oakland, of his grandmother waiting for news, of the empty future that awaited him without Columbia. But something in Daniel's eyes, genuine gratitude, mixed with something else, something like shame and determination, made him nod. "Okay, Mr. Whitmore, I'll come." The Frankfurt hospital was a flurry of efficient German medical precision. Clara was rushed into emergency care while Daniel paced the waiting room, making frantic phone calls to family back in the States. Marcus sat quietly in a corner, his Raiders hoodie making him stand out among the well-dressed travelers and medical staff. It was nearly 2 hours before a doctor emerged, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and perfect English. "Mr. Whitmore, your wife is stable. It was indeed a pulmonary embolism, quite severe. The quick intervention with aspirin and oxygen therapy likely saved her life and the baby's." "Who administered the initial treatment?" Daniel pointed at Marcus, who stood up uncertainly. The doctor's eyebrows rose in surprise at his youth, but she walked over and shook his hand firmly. "Young man, you have excellent instincts. Your assessment was completely accurate, and your treatment protocol was exactly right. You should be very proud." Marcus flushed. "I just did what I was taught, ma'am." Many adults would have frozen in panic. "You acted decisively and correctly. Have you considered a career in medicine?" Before Marcus could answer, Daniel spoke up. "He has an interview at Columbia. Or he did. He missed it because of a flight delay." The doctor looked at Marcus with increased interest. "Columbia is lucky to have you. I hope they realize what they're missing." "They don't know I exist," Marcus said quietly. "The interview was my only shot. Without it they won't even look at my application." The doctor shook her head. "That's a shame. Medicine needs people like you." She turned to Daniel. "You can see your wife now. She's asking for you. And for the young man who saved her." Clara looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to various monitors and IVs, but her color was back, and her eyes were clear. When she saw Marcus, she started crying. "Come here," she said, holding out her hand. When Marcus approached, she gripped it tightly. "The doctor said you saved us." She said, "Without what you did, we might have—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You're okay now," Marcus said gently. "That's all that matters." "No," Clara said firmly, surprising both him and Daniel with her vehemence. That's not all that matters. What matters is that a 17-year-old boy saw strangers in trouble and didn't hesitate to help, even after missing the most important opportunity of his life. What matters is that you knew exactly what to do, and you did it with kindness and skill. What matters is that you are extraordinary, Marcus Johnson, and the world needs to know it. Daniel stood beside the bed, his hand on Clara's shoulder, looking at Marcus with an intensity that made the teenager uncomfortable. Clara's right, Daniel said slowly. Marcus, you gave us back our lives, our child's life. How do we even begin to thank you for that? Marcus shifted awkwardly. You don't need to thank me, Mr. Whitmore. I'm just glad I could help. But there must be something. Daniel pressed. Anything you need, anything at all. Marcus hesitated, then thought of his grandmother back in Oakland, rationing her heart medication because they couldn't afford the full prescription, choosing between pills and groceries. My grandmother, he said quietly. Evelyn Benson. She has a heart condition, congestive heart failure, but our insurance doesn't cover all her medications. If you could help with that, I would be grateful. Daniel felt something crack open inside his chest. This kid, who had just saved his family, wasn't asking for money or recognition, or opportunities for himself. He was asking for help for his grandmother. Consider it done, Daniel said immediately. All her medical expenses covered. But Marcus, that's not enough. It's not nearly enough. It's more than enough for me, sir, Marcus said, meaning it. 3 days later, after Clara had been cleared for travel and arrangements had been made for her medical evacuation back to the United States, Daniel insisted on flying to Oakland with Marcus. Clara, still recovering but stable, agreed enthusiastically, despite her doctor's concerns about the trip. I need to meet the woman who raised such an extraordinary young man, Clara had said, and that was the end of the discussion. They took a private medical flight back to San Francisco, with Clara resting comfortably in a specially equipped cabin while Marcus sat awkwardly in the luxury he still wasn't used to. Daniel spent most of the flight on his laptop and phone, making calls, sending emails, his mind working furiously on something he wouldn't share. When they landed, instead of heading to their mansion in Pacific Heights, Daniel had his driver take them straight to Oakland. Marcus directed them to a modest apartment building on 23rd Street, in a neighborhood that made the driver visibly nervous. The building was old but clean, with security bars on the windows and graffiti on the walls that someone had tried to paint over. You grew up here? Daniel asked, looking around with eyes that were starting to see instead of just look. Born and raised, Marcus said, leading them up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again. It's not much, but it's home. He unlocked the door to apartment 3C, calling out, Grandma, I'm home, and I brought some people to meet you. Evelyn Benson appeared from the kitchen, a small thin woman in her 70s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her dark eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in the well-dressed white couple standing in her small living room. Marcus, baby, thank God you're home safe, she said, hugging her grandson tightly. Then she turned to Daniel and Clara, her expression guarded. And who might these folks be? Grandma, this is Daniel and Clara Whitmore. They're the people from the plane. The ones I told you about on the phone. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again with suspicion. She'd seen too many rich white people come to Oakland with promises they didn't keep. I see. And what brings you to my home, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore? Daniel stepped forward, his usual CEO confidence faltering under this elderly woman's steady gaze. Mrs. Benson, your grandson saved my wife's life, and our unborn child's life. We came to thank you for raising such a remarkable young man. Evelyn snorted softly. Marcus is remarkable because he chooses to be, not because of anything I did. But I appreciate the thought. She paused, studying them. Though I suspect you didn't come all this way just to say thank you. You're right, Daniel admitted. Mrs. Benson, may we sit down? There's something we'd like to discuss with you. They settled into Evelyn's small living room, Marcus perching anxiously on the arm of his grandmother's chair while Daniel and Clara took the worn couch. The apartment was spotless but humble, with family photos covering every surface and medical bills stacked neatly on a side table. Mrs. Benson, Daniel began. I'm the CEO of Whitmore Medical Technologies. We manufacture surgical equipment for hospitals across the country. We're a successful company, very successful. But something your grandson said on that plane has been haunting me. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. And what was that? He talked about taking you to doctor appointments when you can afford them. About learning to monitor your symptoms because regular care wasn't an option. About a community center that offered free first aid classes because the neighborhood had no other options. Daniel leaned forward, his voice intense. Mrs. Benson, I've spent my entire career providing equipment to hospitals, helping doctors save lives. But I've never once thought about the people who can't afford to walk through those hospital doors in the first place. And now you have. Evelyn's voice was skeptical. Now I have, Daniel confirmed. Because a 17-year-old boy from Oakland showed me what I'd been blind to. He showed me that there's talent, there's compassion, there's skill in communities that have been written off and ignored, including my own company's community outreach programs, which I'm ashamed to say were more about tax breaks than actual help. Clara took over, her hand resting on her belly. Mrs. Benson, we want to do something real, something meaningful. We want to build a comprehensive medical center right here in Oakland, in neighborhoods like this, where people can get quality care regardless of their ability to pay. Evelyn laughed, a harsh sound. I've heard promises like that before, Mrs. Whitmore. Rich people come to Oakland all the time with big plans. They give speeches, they cut ribbons, they take pictures. Then they leave and nothing changes. You're right to be skeptical, Daniel acknowledged. But I'm not asking you to trust me based on promises. I'm asking you to help me make sure this is done right. Your grandson showed me that real expertise isn't about expensive degrees or fancy offices. It's about knowing the community, understanding the real needs, and having the courage to act. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase, spreading papers on the coffee table. I've already started the Brightwood Health Initiative. Brightwood was my mother's maiden name. She was from Oakland originally, though my family moved away when she married my father. This feels like coming home in a way. The initiative will fund a comprehensive medical center, but more than that. Free health screenings, medication assistance programs, health education in schools, support for people managing chronic conditions. And I want you involved, Mrs. Benson, you and the community. Not as token representatives, but as real partners in designing and running this. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers, then studying Daniel's face. Why? Why now? Why Oakland? Daniel looked at Marcus, then back at Evelyn. Because your grandson taught me that privilege without purpose is empty. Because I almost lost everything that matters, and a kid from a neighborhood I'd probably never have visited saved it all. Because I can't unsee what I've seen now. The inequality, the injustice, the waste of human potential because of zip codes and bank accounts. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. And because in a few months, I'm going to have a child. And I want that child to grow up in a world where someone like Marcus isn't the exception but the rule. Where talent is nurtured regardless of economic status. Where a grandmother doesn't have to ration heart medication. And a brilliant young man doesn't have to miss the opportunity of a lifetime because of a flight delay. Clara added softly, we want our child to grow up knowing that they were saved by an act of pure compassion, and that their parents honored that by trying to make the world a little more just. Evelyn looked at her grandson, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Marcus, what do you think, baby? Marcus swallowed hard. I think it sounds too good to be true. But Grandma, they seem sincere, and if they're really going to help people in our community, people like us who fall through the cracks, shouldn't we at least try? Evelyn sighed deeply, and in that moment, she looked every one of her 73 years. Mr. Whitmore, I've lived in Oakland my whole life. I've seen poverty, I've seen violence, I've seen people die because they couldn't afford insulin or asthma medication or basic prenatal care. I've watched this community be neglected, forgotten, written off as too dangerous or too poor to matter. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made Daniel sit back. Poor people don't need pity, Mr. Whitmore. They don't need charity that makes rich folks feel good about themselves. They need someone who will stay when things get hard, when the cameras go away, when there's no recognition or reward. They need someone who sees them as equals, not as problems to be solved. Can you do that? Can you be that person? The room fell silent. Daniel felt the weight of her question, the challenge in her words. This was his moment of truth. I don't know, he admitted, his honesty surprising everyone including himself. I don't know if I can be that person alone. But with your help, with Marcus's help, with the community's help, maybe together we can build something real, something lasting." Evelyn studied him for another long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right, Mr. Whitmore, I'll hold you to that. We'll help you build your health center. But understand this, we're not your props for a press conference. We're your partners, and if you try to turn this into just another photo opportunity, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Daniel stood and offered his hand. "It's a deal, Mrs. Benson. Partners." She shook his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Call me Evelyn, and you better mean what you say. Daniel Whitmore, because this community has been disappointed too many times already." The next 6 months were a whirlwind. Daniel threw himself into the Brightwood Health Initiative with a passion that surprised even his closest associates. But it wasn't smooth sailing. The first board meeting was a disaster. When Daniel proposed redirecting $20 million from the company's reserve funds to build the Oakland Medical Center, 3 board members threatened to resign. "This is corporate suicide," one executive declared, pounding the table. "Oakland, you want to build a facility in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in California and offer free care. We'll be bankrupt in a year." "Not free," Daniel corrected firmly, "affordable. Sliding scale based on income. And yes, Oakland, because that's where the need is greatest." "The bank won't loan us money for this," another board member argued. "They've already said the risk is too high. The insurance alone will be astronomical." "Then we'll fund it ourselves," Daniel shot back. "We'll sell assets if we have to." "This is happening." "Why?" The question came from his oldest friend on the board, Richard Chen. "Daniel, I've known you for 20 years, you've never cared about social programs before. What's really going on?" Daniel stood up, pacing to the window overlooking the San Francisco skyline. When he turned back, his face was set with determination. "What's going on is that I almost lost everything that mattered to me. My wife, my child, my soul, all almost gone at 38,000 feet. And they were saved by a 17-year-old kid, who had every reason to ignore us, who had just lost his own dream, who could have stayed in his seat, and no one would have blamed him. But he didn't. He helped because it was right, because someone needed him." He looked around the table at the skeptical faces. "That kid, Marcus Johnson, he's brilliant. He should be at Columbia right now, starting pre-med. But he missed his interview because of circumstances beyond his control, and the system doesn't care. It just moved on without him. How many other Marcus Johnsons are out there? How much talent are we wasting because of zip codes and bank accounts?" "That's very touching," Richard said dryly, "but it's not a business plan." "No," Daniel agreed. "It's better than a business plan. It's a purpose. And I'm done building equipment for hospitals that half the population can't afford to use. I'm done pretending that success means profit margins while people die from treatable conditions. I'm done being the kind of man who would have let Marcus sit in economy class and never even knew his name." He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. "So here's how this is going to work. The Brightwood Health Initiative moves forward. If you want to stay on this board, you support it. If you can't do that, there's the door. I'll buy out your shares myself if I have to." The room erupted in argument. 3 board members did resign. The bank did refuse the loan. The insurance companies quoted astronomical premiums. But Daniel didn't waver. Meanwhile, in Oakland, resistance came from an unexpected quarter, the community itself. At the first town hall meeting, held in the gymnasium of Oakland High School, Evelyn stood beside Daniel and Marcus as angry residents shouted questions and accusations. "Why should we trust you?" a woman yelled from the back. "You're just another rich white man coming to save us poor black folks." "We don't need saving," a man added. "We need jobs, we need investment in our schools, we need the police to stop treating us like criminals. You'll build your fancy center, take some pictures for the newspaper, then close it down when it's not profitable enough," another voice called out. Daniel started to respond, but Evelyn held up her hand. She stepped to the microphone, and the crowd quieted slightly. Everyone knew Mrs. Benson. She'd lived in Oakland for over 70 years, had taught Sunday school at 3 different churches, had been a nurse before the hospital closed its doors. "I know what you're thinking," Evelyn said, her voice carrying clearly. I thought the same thing when these folks first showed up at my door. Another charity case, another rich person's guilt trip. But then I spent time with them. I watched Daniel argue with his own board, risk his own company, to make this happen. I watched Clara research every detail to make sure this center serves real needs. And I've seen the contracts. This isn't a charity, it's a partnership. She paused, looking around the room. But you're right to be suspicious. We've been burned before. So here's what I propose. We form a community board, real oversight, real power. We approve the plans, we approve the hiring, we make sure this stays true to what we need. And if Mr. Whitmore here tries to pull any corporate nonsense, we can shut it down. The contracts are already drawn up that way. The crowd murmured, uncertain. Then Marcus stepped to the microphone. I grew up here, he said, his voice shaking slightly, in Building C on 23rd Street. I've lived my whole life watching people in our community suffer because they can't afford basic health care. I watched my grandmother ration her heart medication. I watched my friend's little sister die from asthma because they couldn't afford an inhaler and the ER was too far away. His voice grew stronger. Mr. Whitmore isn't perfect, he comes from a different world than us. But he's trying, really trying. And yeah, maybe he'll mess up. Maybe he'll make mistakes. But I'd rather have someone trying imperfectly than no one trying at all. He looked directly at Daniel, and if he does mess up, if he forgets his promises, then I'll be the first one to call him out. Because this community deserves better than broken promises. We deserve real change, real care, real partnership. The gymnasium fell silent. Then slowly, an elderly man in the front row stood up. I remember when Highland Hospital still had a community clinic. Before the budget cuts, before they decided our neighborhood wasn't worth the investment. He looked at Daniel with weary eyes. Young man, can you promise me this center won't disappear like that clinic did? Daniel stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. Sir, I can't promise that everything will be perfect. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, because I know I will. What I can promise is that I will fight for this center every single day. I will put my money, my reputation, my company on the line to keep it open. And I will listen, really listen, to what you need, not what I think you need. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. 3 months ago, my wife was dying at 38,000 feet. I was powerless, terrified, watching everything I loved slip away. And your community, through Marcus, saved her, saved our baby. How do I repay a debt like that? How do I honor a gift that profound? This center isn't charity, it's gratitude. It's me trying to be worthy of the second chance your community gave my family. A woman in the middle stood up, her voice skeptical but softer. And what happens when you get bored? When the next big thing comes along? Before Daniel could answer, Clara spoke from her seat in the front row. She was 8 months pregnant now, her belly prominent as she struggled to stand with Daniel's help. I'm going to have this baby in 6 weeks, she said, her hand on her stomach. Every time I feel him kick, I remember that I almost never got to meet him. That he almost never got to exist. Marcus gave me my son's life. Her voice broke. I will spend every day of my life, making sure that what Marcus did wasn't wasted. That the compassion he showed us ripples out to help others. This center is my promise to my child, that he'll grow up in a world where the Marcus Johnsons of the world are celebrated, not overlooked. The woman sat down slowly, nodding. Another voice from the back, what about jobs? Is this going to bring jobs to our community? Evelyn stepped back to the microphone. The hiring priority goes to Oakland residents first, that's in the contract. Doctors, nurses, administrative staff, we train our own people when we can. Hire locally when we can't. And there's going to be a scholarship program too, for young people who want to go into healthcare. A young woman raised her hand. Is it true that the scholarship program is named after Marcus? Daniel smiled. Actually, it's named after Marcus and Mrs. Benson. The Benson Johnson Medical Scholarship Program. Full ride for any Oakland resident who wants to pursue healthcare education and agrees to come back and serve the community for at least 5 years after graduation. Marcus's head whipped around in surprise. You didn't tell me that part. I'm telling you now, Daniel said with a grin. Then turning back to the crowd, His expression grew serious again. Look, I know talk is cheap. I know you've heard promises before, so let me make this concrete. Construction starts next month. We've purchased the old warehouse on Foothill Boulevard, the one that's been abandoned for 15 years. We're converting it into a state-of-the-art medical facility, and we're hiring community members to do the construction work. He pulled out a folder of documents. These are the architectural plans, the budget breakdowns, the hiring commitments. Everything is transparent. Everything is available for community review. You want to see where every dollar goes. It's public record. You want to interview potential staff. The community board has veto power. This is your center. I'm just the guy writing the checks. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with questions ranging from skeptical to hopeful, angry to grateful. By the end, the community hadn't fully embraced the initiative, but there was a cautious willingness to give it a chance. As people filed out, a teenage girl approached Marcus. She looked about 14, with braids and braces, carrying a worn backpack. "Marcus," she asked shyly, "is it true you saved someone's life on a plane?" Marcus flushed. "I just helped. The doctors did the real work. But you knew what to do, even though you're just in high school." She looked at him with awe. "I want to be a nurse someday. My mama says we can't afford it, but maybe with the scholarship." "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently. Jasmine Lee." "Well, Jasmine, you keep those grades up, okay? And when the time comes, you apply for that scholarship. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it." Jasmine's face lit up with the biggest smile. "Really, you think I could?" "I know you could. If I can do it, anyone can." After she left, Evelyn put her arm around her grandson's shoulders. "You know Columbia called today, while you were at school." Marcus's heart stopped. "What?" "Seems someone sent them a very detailed letter about a certain young man who saved 2 lives on a transatlantic flight, complete with medical records, witness statements, and a personal plea from a CEO of a major medical technology company." She looked pointedly at Daniel, who was pretending to examine the architectural plans. "What did they say?" Marcus whispered. "They want to interview you next week. Said they're very interested in students who demonstrate practical application of medical knowledge and extraordinary compassion." Marcus felt his knees go weak. Daniel and Clara were suddenly beside him, grinning. You did that?" Marcus asked Daniel. "I made some calls," Daniel admitted. "Told them about the most remarkable young man I'd ever met. Offered to endow a scholarship in your name if they admitted you. They were very receptive, but the scholarship program here. I thought I'd stay, help with the center." "You'll do both," Evelyn said firmly. "You'll go to Columbia, become the doctor you're meant to be, then come back and lead the medical programs at Brightwood. That's the plan." Marcus couldn't speak. He just stood there, overwhelmed, as his grandmother hugged him tight and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, baby. So proud." The construction of the Brightwood Health Center faced obstacle after obstacle. Contractors backed out, citing safety concerns about the neighborhood. Supply deliveries were stolen. Vandals spray-painted threatening messages on the construction barriers. But for every setback, there was an unexpected triumph. When contractors backed out, local workers stepped up, many of them taking a chance on employment for the first time in years. When supplies were stolen, the community organized neighborhood watches, protecting the site. When vandals struck, local artists covered the graffiti with murals celebrating community heroes. Marcus, splitting his time between finishing high school, preparing for Columbia, and volunteering at the construction site, became the unofficial bridge between the Whitmores and the community. He translated not just words but worlds. "Mr. Whitmore," he said one day, pulling Daniel aside as the CEO examined the framing of what would become the main clinic area. "You can't just install security cameras everywhere without asking. People here are already over-surveilled, already watched by police. They'll see it as another form of control." Daniel frowned. "But we need to protect the equipment, the medications. There's a lot of expensive stuff that will be here." "I know. But there are ways to do it that don't make people feel like criminals." Security focused on the medication storage, not the waiting rooms. Cameras that protect property, not monitor people. and maybe hiring community members as security guards instead of bringing in some outside firm. Daniel listened, learning. It was a humbling education for a man who'd spent his career giving orders, not taking them. Clara, despite her advanced pregnancy, became a regular presence at community meetings. She listened to mothers talk about their children's asthma, to elderly residents describe their struggles with diabetes management, to teenagers worried about mental health resources. "We need a dental clinic too," one mother said. "My son has cavities so bad he can't eat, but the only dentist that takes our insurance is 3 bus rides away and has a 6-month wait." Clara made notes. "We'll add dental services. What else?" "Mental health," a young man said quietly. "There's a lot of trauma in this community. We need counselors who understand where we come from." "Mental health services," Clara confirmed, writing it down. "What else? Don't hold back, tell me everything." And they did. The plans for Brightwood Health Center grew and evolved, shaped by the community it would serve. 8 months after that fateful flight, Clara went into labor. Daniel rushed her to the best hospital in San Francisco, where she was admitted to a private suite with every comfort money could buy. But as the hours passed and the labor progressed, Clara kept thinking about the women in Oakland, who couldn't afford prenatal care, who gave birth in overcrowded public hospitals, or even at home because they had no better options. "Daniel," she said between contractions, gripping his hand, "promise me something. Anything, love. Promise me that Brightwood will have the best prenatal program in the state, that no woman there will ever have to be afraid, because she can't afford good care." "I promise," Daniel said, kissing her forehead. "I promise." 12 hours later, Clara delivered a healthy baby boy. As Daniel held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face, all he could think about was Marcus, the teenager who had made this moment possible. "What are we naming him?" the nurse asked, pen poised over the birth certificate. Clara and Daniel looked at each other and smiled. "Marcus," Clara said firmly. "Marcus Hope Whitmore." The nurse wrote it down, then paused. "That's a beautiful name. Any particular reason?" Daniel looked at his son's tiny face, already so perfect, so precious. "We're naming him after the person who gave him life, and the hope he represents for a better world." They called Marcus from the hospital, putting him on speakerphone so he could hear the baby's first cries. The teenager, studying for finals in his grandmother's living room, was speechless. "You named him after me," his voice cracked with emotion. "We did," Clara confirmed, "because you gave us this precious gift, and we want him to grow up knowing that he's named after someone extraordinary. Someone who showed us what true heroism looks like." "I'm not a hero," Marcus protested. "I just did what anyone should do." "And that," Daniel said, "is exactly what makes you one." 2 weeks later, they brought baby Marcus home and immediately drove to Oakland. Evelyn Benson was waiting, having prepared her small apartment, with all the care of a grandmother welcoming her own grandchild. She took the baby in her experienced arms, her eyes filling with tears as she looked down at the tiny face. "Hello, little Marcus," she whispered. "You're named after someone very special. My grandson, who has the biggest heart I've ever known." Young Marcus stood beside her, looking down at his namesake with wonder. "He's so small. You were that small once," Evelyn reminded him. "And look at you now, about to go to Columbia, going to be a doctor, going to change the world." "I'm scared, Grandma," Marcus admitted quietly. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" "Baby, you flew across an ocean, saved 2 lives and started a revolution in this community. Columbia should be scared of you, not the other way around." Daniel, standing nearby with his arm around Clara, cleared his throat. "Marcus, there's something else we need to tell you." "About the center?" Marcus looked up, concerned. "Is something wrong?" "No, everything's right. Better than right. We've received additional funding from 3 other medical technology companies who were inspired by our model. The Brightwood Health Center is going to be bigger than we planned. And we want you to be the medical director when you finish your training." "Medical director? But I haven't even started med school yet. It'll be a while before the center needs a medical director," Clara explained. "By the time you finish at Columbia and complete your residency, you'll be exactly who we need." Someone who understands both medicine and community. Someone who can bridge the gap between cutting-edge healthcare and compassionate service. Evelyn beamed with pride. Hear that, baby? They want you to run the whole thing. If you'll do it, Daniel added. No pressure, but we can't imagine anyone better. Marcus looked around the room, at his grandmother holding the baby named after him, at the Whitmores who had become like family, at the path unfolding before him that seemed too good to be true. I'll do it, he said. On one condition. Name it, Daniel said immediately. That grandma is part of the leadership too, community liaison or something, because none of this works without the community's voice, and there's no voice more trusted than hers. Evelyn laughed. Baby, I'm 73 years old. I'll be ancient by the time you're done with medical school. Then you better stay healthy, Marcus said firmly. Because Brightwood needs you. Oakland needs you. I need you. The opening ceremony of the Brightwood Health Center took place on a sunny Saturday morning 18 months later. The transformed warehouse gleamed with fresh paint and new signage. Inside, state-of-the-art medical equipment filled examination rooms, while comfortable waiting areas featured artwork from local artists and photos of community members who had contributed to the center's creation. Over 3,000 people crowded the street, a mix of Oakland residents, medical professionals from across the state, politicians and media. But the ceremony itself was decidedly community-focused. Marcus, home from his first year at Columbia for the summer, stood on the makeshift stage with his grandmother, the Whitmores, with baby Marcus in Clara's arms, and community leaders. He wore his Columbia hoodie with pride, but his roots were obvious in every word he spoke. A year and a half ago, he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. I was on a plane, flying home from what I thought was my biggest failure. I'd missed the opportunity I'd worked my whole life for, and I was bitter, angry, ready to give up. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Then I heard someone call for help, and I had a choice. I could stay in my seat, nurse my disappointment, focus on my own problems, or I could act. I could use what I'd learned from taking care of my grandmother, from volunteering at the community center, from every free class and training session I could find. I chose to act, and that choice changed everything. Not just for Mrs. Whitmore and her baby, but for all of us. Because that one moment of connection showed us that we're not as different as society wants us to believe. That compassion crosses every boundary. That talent exists everywhere, if we're willing to see it. He gestured to the building behind him. This center represents that choice, multiplied 1,000 times. It's every person who donated their time to build it. Every community member who shared their needs and their wisdom. Every medical professional who committed to serving here. Every person who chose to believe that change was possible. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus waited for it to die down, then continued. But this isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. Today we open these doors to serve Oakland, to provide quality healthcare to everyone who walks through them, regardless of their ability to pay. But more than that, we're opening doors of opportunity. The Benson Johnson Scholarship Program starts this year, with 10 students. By next year we hope to have 20. These students will become doctors, nurses, technicians, counselors, and they'll come back to serve their community. He looked at Evelyn, who stood beside him with tears streaming down her face. My grandmother taught me that we rise by lifting others, that our worth isn't measured in what we accumulate, but in what we give. This center is that principle in action. Then he turned to Daniel and Clara. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore came to Oakland, with good intentions but limited understanding. They could have built a fancy facility, put their name on it, and called it a day. Instead they listened, they learned, they let the community shape this center into what it needed to be. They proved that privilege becomes purpose when it's paired with humility. Finally he addressed the crowd directly. To everyone here from Oakland, this is your center, not mine. Not the Whitmores, not some corporations, yours. You built it, you shaped it, you made it real. And now it's your responsibility to use it, to protect it, to make it the heart of health and healing in our community. He held up a large pair of ceremonial scissors. So let's open these doors together. Instead of having just one person cut the ribbon, Marcus invited 12 community members to join him, including Jasmine Lee, the teenage girl who dreamed of being a nurse, now a scholarship recipient herself, Mr. Washington, the elderly man who'd questioned Daniel at the town hall, Maria from the plane, who had flown in for the ceremony, and Evelyn Benson, who stood at the center of the group with her grandson. As they cut the ribbon together, and the crowd surged forward to tour the facility. Daniel found himself standing alone for a moment, watching the celebration. He thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, successful, wealthy, but fundamentally disconnected from anything meaningful. He thought about that moment of panic on the plane, when he'd almost refused help because of prejudice and pride. Clara appeared beside him, baby Marcus asleep against her shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," she said softly. "We did it," Daniel corrected. "All of us." "No," Clara insisted. "You changed, Daniel. You could have just written a check and moved on. Instead you transformed yourself, your company, your entire worldview. I'm proud of you." Daniel pulled her close, careful not to wake the baby. "I'm just trying to be worthy of what Marcus gave us. Every day I wake up and think about how close I came to losing you, to losing him." He touched his son's soft hair. "And I think about how a kid from Oakland, someone I would have walked past on the street without a second glance, saved everything that matters." "You're not that man anymore," Clara reminded him. "No," Daniel agreed. "I'm not, and I never want to be again." The first day of operation at Brightwood Health Center was chaotic and beautiful. The waiting room filled before dawn, with people who'd been waiting months or even years for reliable healthcare. The staff, a mix of experienced professionals and newly trained community members, worked tirelessly. Marcus, volunteering during his summer break, found himself translating, comforting, and occasionally assisting with minor medical procedures under supervision. He saw firsthand the impact of the center: the diabetic man who could finally afford his insulin, the child with asthma receiving a nebulizer treatment, the pregnant woman getting her first prenatal checkup at 6 months along. But the moment that brought him to tears was when he saw Mr. Jenkins, their elderly neighbor from Building C, checking in at the front desk. "Mr. Jenkins," Marcus said, approaching him, "I didn't know you were coming in today." The old man's face lit up. "Marcus, shouldn't you be at that fancy college, summer break?" "I'm volunteering here." "What brings you in?" Mr. Jenkins' smile faded slightly. "My hip's been bothering me for 2 years now. Can barely walk some days, but I couldn't afford to see no doctor about it. Then I heard this place was open, and I thought, maybe they could help." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Mr. Jenkins had been suffering for 2 years, just floors below Marcus's own apartment, and he hadn't known. How many others were there like him? "We'll take care of you, Mr. Jenkins," Marcus promised. "That's what we're here for." Watching Mr. Jenkins walk into the examination room, supported by a nurse who treated him with dignity and kindness, Marcus understood the true magnitude of what they'd built. This wasn't just a medical facility, it was hope, made tangible. Years passed, and the Brightwood Health Center became a model for community-based healthcare across the country. Marcus completed his medical degree at Columbia with honors, then returned to Oakland for his residency at Highland Hospital, while also taking on increasing responsibilities at Brightwood. Daniel's company, Whitmore Medical Technologies, shifted its entire business model to focus on making medical equipment more affordable and accessible. The Benson Johnson Scholarship Program expanded to include students from underserved communities across California, with dozens of recipients now practicing medicine. Evelyn Benson, despite her age and health challenges, remained actively involved in the center until her final days. She passed away peacefully at 81, surrounded by her grandson, the Whitmores, and a community that had loved her fiercely. The center held a memorial service that drew over 1,000 people, all with stories of how Mrs. Benson had touched their lives. "She was the heart of this place," Daniel said at her funeral, his voice breaking. "She challenged me, changed me, made me see the world differently." Oakland has lost a giant today. Young Marcus, now nearly 8 years old, stood beside his namesake and asked in a whisper, "Why is everyone crying?" Dr. Marcus Johnson, now in his mid-20s and the center's associate medical director, knelt down to the boy's level. "Because Mrs. Benson was special. She taught us all how to care for each other, how to see the best in people, how to build something that lasts, like this center. Exactly like this center. She helped build it, and now it helps thousands of people every year." Little Marcus thought about this seriously. "When I grow up, I want to help people too, like you do, like Mrs. Benson did." Dr. Marcus smiled through his tears. "Then you will, because you carry her name, and mine, and that means you carry the responsibility to care." On the 5th anniversary of the Brightwood Health Center, they held a celebration that was equal parts party and medical fair. free health screenings, children's activities, food trucks from local businesses, and testimonials from patients whose lives had been changed. Jasmine Lee, now in her final year of nursing school at UCLA thanks to the Benson Johnson Scholarship, spoke about how the center had changed her life. 5 years ago I was a kid with a dream that seemed impossible. Now I'm months away from becoming a registered nurse, and I already have a job waiting for me right here at Brightwood. This center didn't just provide healthcare to my community, it provided hope, opportunity and a future. The scholarship program now supported 50 students annually, with graduates beginning to staff not just Brightwood, but community health centers across the state. The model had been replicated in 12 other cities, each center adapted to meet the specific needs of its community, while maintaining the core principle of partnership over charity. Dr. Marcus Johnson, standing on the same stage where he'd spoken at the opening ceremony, looked out at the crowd with profound gratitude. Baby Marcus, now a confident 8-year-old, stood beside him, while Daniel and Clara sat in the front row, graying but happy. 5 years ago, Marcus began, we took a chance on each other. A wealthy executive took a chance on a kid from Oakland. A skeptical community took a chance on outsiders with big promises. I took a chance on believing that one act of compassion could ripple outward and change the world. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. Today, we can see the results of those chances. Over 75,000 patient visits, infant mortality in this neighborhood, down by 42%. Chronic disease management, up by 65%, 50 scholarship students pursuing healthcare careers, 12 new community health centers across the state, based on our model. But those numbers, as impressive as they are, don't tell the real story. The real story is in the faces I see every day in our waiting room. The grandmother who can finally manage her diabetes, the child who can breathe without fear because she has an inhaler, the mother who got prenatal care and delivered a healthy baby, the teenager who discovered a passion for medicine because someone believed in him. He looked directly at young Marcus. The real story is in the next generation, who will grow up knowing that healthcare is a right, not a privilege, who will see people like me, who look like them, who came from where they came from, in positions of leadership and expertise, who will understand that their zip code doesn't determine their destiny. Little Marcus, with the fearless confidence of childhood, stepped up to the microphone. I'm Marcus Hope Whitmore, and I'm named after Dr. Johnson because he saved my mom and me before I was even born. When I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor too, and I'm going to help save people just like he does. The crowd erupted in applause and laughter. Dr. Johnson put his arm around his young namesake's shoulders, and in that moment, the connection between them, across race, across class, across generation, was clear and beautiful. After the ceremony, as the sun set over Oakland, and the celebration continued with music and dancing, Marcus found himself standing with Daniel near the community garden that had been planted behind the center. Do you ever think about that flight? Daniel asked. About how different everything could have been. Sometimes, Marcus admitted, if I'd stayed in my seat, if you'd refused my help, if any number of things had gone differently, I almost did refuse. Daniel confessed. For about 30 seconds, I was going to say no, because you were young, and black, and from a neighborhood I'd been taught to fear. I was going to let my wife die, rather than trust you. Marcus looked at him steadily. But you didn't. But I almost did. And that haunts me, Marcus. How close I came to being that person. You're not that person, Daniel. You haven't been for a long time. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I got a call last week, from the CEO of another medical technology company. He wants to replicate what we did here, partner with a community to build a health center. Do you know what I told him? What? I told him to find his Marcus. Find the person in that community who sees what others miss, who cares when it's inconvenient, who has the courage to act, and then listen to them. Really listen, not just to their words, but to the years of experience and wisdom they carry. Marcus smiled. That's good advice. It's the only advice that matters. Everything else, the funding, the planning, the logistics, that's all secondary to finding the right partner and being humble enough to learn from them. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching little Marcus chase other children through the garden, while Clara and Daniel's second child, a daughter they'd named Evelyn Hope Whitmore, played on the swings nearby. You know what the best part is, Daniel said finally. It's not the center.
as wonderful as that is, it's not even the lives we've saved, though that's profound. The best part is seeing these kids, Marcus, Evelyn, all the children in this community, growing up in a different world than we did, growing up knowing that help can come from anywhere, that heroes look like everyone, that compassion crosses every boundary, and that change is possible. Marcus added, that's maybe the most important lesson, because you showed us it was possible. Daniel corrected, one act of courage, of compassion, of believing that a life was worth saving, even when it cost you something precious. That's where it all started. Marcus shook his head. It started long before that, with my grandmother, teaching me to care for others, with Mr. Jackson at the community center, teaching first aid to kids who couldn't afford formal training, with Dr. Martinez, who took time to explain things to a scared teenager in an emergency room. I'm just one link in a long chain. Then let's make sure that chain never breaks, Daniel said. Let's keep building, keep growing, keep proving that healthcare is a human right, and that communities have the power to transform themselves. Deal, Marcus agreed, shaking Daniel's hand. As night fell over Oakland, the Brightwood Health Center stood illuminated, a beacon of hope in a neighborhood that had known too much darkness. Inside, the night shift was beginning, ready to serve anyone who walked through the doors. In the scholarship office, applications from hopeful students covered every surface, each one representing another potential healer, another future caregiver, another link in the chain. And somewhere in that building, a young woman named Jasmine Lee was beginning her first nursing shift as a newly licensed RN, ready to care for the community that had invested in her dreams. The story that began at 38,000 feet had grown beyond anyone's imagination, touching thousands of lives, creating ripples that would extend far into the future. It proved that transformation was possible, of people, of communities, of systems that seemed immutable, but at its core, it remained a simple story. A story of a teenager who cared enough to act, a couple who were humble enough to learn, a grandmother who was wise enough to guide, a community that was strong enough to believe, a story of hope, named and claimed, lived and shared. And the story was far from over. Every day brought new chapters, new challenges, new triumphs. Every patient served, every student educated, every life saved was another verse in an ongoing song of healing and transformation. Dr. Marcus Johnson would go on to lead the Brightwood Health Center for decades, training generations of healthcare providers, expanding services to meet emerging needs, never forgetting the scared 17-year-old he'd been on that plane. Little Marcus Hope Whitmore would indeed become a doctor, eventually joining Marcus as a partner in leading the center into its fourth decade of service. But all of that was yet to come. On this anniversary night, under the Oakland stars, surrounded by community and family, they celebrated what they'd built together, a monument not of marble or stone, but of compassion, service, and unshakable hope. The boy from Oakland had saved first class, and in doing so had saved them all.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.